Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, we ended the last episode talking about encyclicals and their importance. We dove into a little bit of what it's all about, taking the message of God and bringing it to the modern times. And obviously, like anything else, there's people that listen and there's people that don't. And my question is that while it's an encyclical is the answer of how to apply this particular teaching to our modern society. You mentioned before about the distribution of goods and how we're called to grow and develop our talents that we are given from God, which is also another argument about why we all don't have the same talents. There are some people that are better at moving water. There are some people that are better at planting. There are some people better at harvesting. Apply that to all industries and you get the gist of what I'm going with here. So we know if we don't listen to the teachings of Jesus in the Bible, it's a disruption from God and therefore a sin. If we don't listen to an encyclical, is that also sinful?
That's a great question. So the requirement is that listen to. So yeah, an encyclical is not on the same level as the Bible. The Bible is certainly divine revelation. An encyclical is an interpretation and an application at the highest level of that divine revelation. So we do really have the requirement to take seriously and try to understand in the light of that teaching what we understand from Scripture. So, but again, there's a whole body of doctrine that falls in the midst of. So an encyclical cannot contradict a previous encyclical, and that's presumed and sometimes explicitly referenced. And so, as I mentioned in a previous episode, Rerum Novarum of Leo XIII is the first social encyclical, but Quadragesimo Anno was 40 years later, and Centesimus Annus was 100 years later. Octogesimo Anno was 80 years later, and then also Pope Benedict and Pope Paul VI in Populorum Progressio, and then Pope Benedict in Caritas and Veritate, all were building on Rerum Novarum, but they were highlighting different dimensions of it. But it presumes that you're taking it in light of Rerum Novarum. So the point is, a single line in an encyclical comes out of a whole body of knowledge, and we're not always equipped to get all of the nuances and all of that. So it's not uncommon that we read these things. So there was kind of controversy around Laudato Si of Pope Francis, which was on creation, which got transposed into on the environment, which conservatives thought was about environmentalism, which they had categorically rejected because they reject certain foundational claims of environmentalism. And so then they rejected the whole encyclical. Well, there's a lot more to that encyclical than environmentalism. Furthermore, it doesn't come out of political categories, it comes out of doctrinal categories. So the whole context is different. And then even where Pope Francis referenced science, he didn't make declarations about it. He referenced, a consensus or something. But the teaching of the encyclical doesn't really depend on that. It depends on divine revelation, and just notes that you can agree or disagree about climate change, but the fact is that we have a responsibility to care for creation. So that's really the point. And if in fact climate change is happening because of destructive forces, and I don't think it's too hard to say in some places, the raping of the Amazon. Anyway, there's lots of charged ways of describing these things, but being negligent, careless, reckless, wasteful with these things is not the way that we should approach them. And the people that suffer first are the poor. And so you can see that the encyclical is really an effort to teach about the care of the poor and the care of creation coming from the hand of God. And the way that I remember one of the things he said there was, we see how the creation has a way of recycling in a genuine way. Mm-hmm. A tree falls to the ground, it gets absorbed in the dirt, it's eaten by earthworms, and it emerges, as creates plants and flowers, right? God actually renews everything. Our created human things often are not that way. And
Hmm.
so the challenge for us is to be more godlike in how we do things. And then people stupidly turn that into, that means you need to recycle all your aluminum cans. Like, that's not what he said. Okay,
Hmm.
so now I'm giving some a little bit of pushback around different things. Yes, we need to take the Pope's teaching at that level and encyclical seriously, and we want to integrate it into our theological thinking. But first of all, that requires you have theological thinking and you understand the theological context that it comes out of. And
Hmm.
that's not possible for everybody. So we have to be careful about how we apply or what simplistic catchphrases and headlines we use when we talk about incorporating the church's, the Pope's teaching.
And that's why I love having you, Father, because I recognize that there's an entire tier of communication writings that are basically PhDs writing for other PhDs. Like, and there's a wide array of this. And it makes me think back to a conversation that we had about how everything builds upon itself. And in terms of, we can't even imagine what the world would be like without some certain base factors. A month or so ago, I didn't have power for a week. And most people can't imagine what that's like. We couldn't imagine what the world would be like without the faith. And you mentioned, it was your last episode or 2 episodes ago, that Pope Leo the First, the Great, is the one who set down the theological groundwork that Jesus is both God and man. And that's something that in modern times, most people who even just gone through basic CCD got that basic part. And that was cutting edge at the time. And yeah, there's probably a very real argument that Leo the Great at that time and the other people involved could have taken it further. They could have taken it to the conversation further and beyond, but they took it to the extent of where the people were and maybe a little bit past it. And then when you build upon the rest of it, you can come to the next steps. I use this as an example. It might be a good one, it might not. If you've ever seen an adjustable ladder, they can be taken to their maximum height, say 40 feet. And when you see a lot of roofers that are experienced, they take that ladder to just high enough to be able to step from that top ring onto a roof. Where you see a lot of people that are starting out, they take it a couple notches higher to be able to safely go on and easily go on. And I bring this up from the standpoint of what you're teaching here. There's a lot of people that need it spoon fed to them. Very easy, very safe, all that. But that's not the way that super elite talented people talk to each other. Use another example. Have you ever seen an interview where Peyton Manning and Tom Brady are talking to each other? Most regular fans cannot interpret what they're saying and actually truly understand what they're meaning. And that's NFL. I mean, that's not like that's super high level. There's certainly not 2,000 years worth of knowledge, thinking, and praying about it. So all of this to say, I totally understand how trying to understand and put it into a 30-second soundbite that the American media is based upon or putting it into a tweet is not going to work. You cannot water down something that is so powerful and dense. So I sorry if I went on a little bit of a side note about there, but I think that was something that needs to be thought of. And there's another point that I want to bring up here about the Pope that I think also gets incredibly watered down. And I blame Twitter again for this, is that one of the notions of Twitter essentially is that everyone gets a voice, everyone can say something. Theoretically, everyone is equal, whether you're an expert or know what you're talking about or not. But one of the titles, and this might even be stronger than a title, of the Pope is that he is the Vicar of Christ, which means he is tied to Christ. He is an ember of Christ on earth. There's probably a better way to say that, which means he is not the equivalent of some 13-year-old tweeting from his basement thinking he knows what it means, or someone who's just looking for clickbait. There is a lot more power, authority, etc., that goes into being the Pope. So I bring this up full circle to say, obviously Leo is a new pope now, and he has the ability and direction to go anywhere he wants. And to be totally honest, I'm not exactly what you would say up to date on my encyclicals. So, with that being said, what should we look for and pay attention to from Leo and in general from the papacy?
Well, I started down this path of saying what I found to be remarkable and unique about Pope Leo XIV, and I got derailed by my own commentary. So
Sorry
let
about
me
that.
let me run at it from that direction, and I think that will be helpful. Pope Leo XIV is born in Chicago, went to Villanova. He joined the Augustinians, which is a religious order, and he was never an American bishop. So he was never part of the U.S. conference, Catholic conference, or conference of Catholic bishops, because as an Augustinian, he worked in some pastoral assignments, and then was even the superior general of the order as well as provincial. So he had significant governance authority, but he also had significant pastoral ministry. So he's one of those unique people that can bridge the gap between administration and direct pastoral ministry, and had a lot of that. He then he spent time in Rome also studying canon law. He has a licentiate and a doctorate in canon law from the University of St. Thomas Aquinas, which we call the Angelicum in Rome. And I also am a alumnus of the Angelicum, and so I feel a little affinity with Pope Leo. But he has a licentiate and a doctorate in canon law. So he's a canon lawyer, pastor, administrator, and then he became a missionary to South America. So he has North American experience, various places in the United States. He has Roman experience. He has administrative experience. He has pastoral experience. And then he developed missionary experience in South America and was in a missionary diocese so young that it wasn't a diocese. He eventually was named the apostolic administrator of that diocese and was ordained a bishop, and then became bishop of that diocese once it was established. And so in a very poor place in Peru, he had all of that missionary experience and now South American experience. One of the things that was often said about Pope Francis is he brought a South American perspective and seemed not to understand the North American perspective or the European perspective. Pope Leo has lived in all three places. After being bishop in South America for 8 years, he was named a cardinal and appointed to be the head of the dicastery of bishops. So he was responsible for appointing all of the bishops in the world. And that meant that he got a vision of the universal church. Now he has advisors and he gets recommendations from metropolitans, from nuncios. There's a lot of layers in that. People who, as I mentioned, the principle of subsidiarity, the people closest to the scene should be making the decisions, but he would make the ultimate decisions on those. So he got to know the universal church. He also got to know the curia in Rome. And so he knows the players over there. He knows the structures of the curia from the inside, but only for the last 2 years. He's only been a cardinal for 2 years. He's only been in the curia for 2 years. So, and he didn't climb up the ranks in any ordinary way that would, that can be a little bit more corrupting in some of the influences, or a little bit more incestuous in the sense of taking on cultures and qualities that could use some fresh air and some new blood, as it were. So he has this remarkable combination of experiences and formative pathways in his life, and then also religious and diocesan, as a member of a religious order, but also involved as a diocesan bishop in diocesan parishes. Really remarkable. So I think that his vision, his view of things is going to bring a really unique quality to it. I think a more harmonious. I think the world suffers from a bit of tribalism and cliquishness, separation. I think he has bridged a number of gaps just in his own heart, in his own life. And I can imagine him being the supreme pontiff. One translation of pontiff is bridge builder. And so I can see him building some of those bridges in his ministry. And then apparently, he's in touch with the signs of the times. He's 69 years old. So he's really come of age he's much more in the modern world. He's a full 20 years younger than Pope Francis. And so he really brings a fresher perspective on some of those things. And, he plays Wordle with his brother every day on his cell phone, right? So that's the kind of difference that we have. I don't think Pope Francis had a cell phone. And so we're getting that kind of shift as well. So I can't even guess what his first teaching will be, and it'll be interesting. I'm very eager to hear his homilies. What I've heard so far I've found to be a nice combination of the clarity and kind of the preparedness and some of the philosophical reflection of Pope Benedict, together with some of the missionary zeal and familiarity that we saw with Pope Francis. I've seen notes of both of those papacies in his homilies so far.
And that's amazing. Can we conclude this episode with kind of what does it mean in terms of the Vicar of Christ and what that title and it means in a practical sense?
Yeah, so he has supreme, immediate, universal, and there's another adjective in there, authority. He could say tomorrow, Father Boniface, you are now the Bishop of Juneau, Alaska, essentially. Or he could say, Father Boniface, well, he can change the law. Anyway, I don't want to make it too extreme, but the point is he doesn't need to work through structures. He can immediately affect the life. He could say, Joe Rockey, I'm going to ordain you a priest tomorrow. He can do that. So within certain structures, again, he can't change doctrine, so he can't say that to your wife. It's been clarified that it's not the church doesn't have the authority to ordain women, but within certain structures, he can make those kinds of immediate steps. He certainly can teach. So he does that as the Vicar of Christ, and that is to say, he is a kind of visible head. And I think we felt that for a week or 10 days that after Pope Francis died, our church doesn't have a head, and it feels odd to not have a head. So he's the principal Vicar of Christ, and he carries authority. He has a teaching authority, and it's his responsibility to teach and to nourish with the sacraments the faithful, to arrange the life of the church so that it will function well to serve the flourishing of the faithful through doctrine and the sacraments. He is kind of, you get this a little bit in John 21 when Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? He says, feed my sheep. Do you love me? I'm sorry, feed my lambs. Do you love me? Tend my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. And it was, I forget, it might have been Pope Leo, actually, the Great, who said, the sheep are the bishops and the lambs are the faithful. And so the Pope not only feeds the lambs, he also feeds the bishops. So he's sort of the father of the fathers, you could say. The bishops themselves are the fathers of the fathers towards the priests. The priests are the fathers of their people as pastors, So you have a little bit of that, but he's really the father of the fathers. He's the kind of top of the line. He's the Vicar of Christ. He's the head of the church, and then has a lot of authority and responsibility that goes with that.
So first, I appreciate going across these last 3 episodes of discussing the Pope, discussing the papacy. It's a lot of things that I have a lot of questions about, and as hopefully they came across. We do welcome if there's any questions that you want to know, whether it be a topic for a show or a question about the Pope or either of us, quite frankly. Feel free to send them in to Father and Joe, all written out as one word, at gmail.com. We do check our inboxes. We've had a number of great responses, mostly saying thank yous, which, by the way, Father, we've been getting a lot of emails saying thank you. I don't know how adequately I've shared that with you, but we thank everyone for sharing. And like I said, if there's any comments or questions you have, please feel free to do it. And our request today is the same similar one that I've done always, is please leave a written review and a star review on whatever podcast platform you are getting us from. It does make a tremendous difference. We thank you all for being with us this week, and we will be with you again next week.